We've come to the end of this short 5-segment video series of this unique team teaching experiment. The course has now moved from the antagonistic narratives of the past, the trial and error in the current peace efforts, and focuses on the search for common ground over the most divisive issues, the future of the old city of Jerusalem and its holy places. Professors Sasassian and Kaufman provide the students with some initial strategies and the rules of effective brainstorming. Now the students, simulating Palestinians and Israelis, work jointly in teams in order to offer solutions. Areas of interest include governance, security, education, justice, and economic development, to name a few. This video series is coming to a close, but we would like to keep in contact with you, the viewer. Come to participate this coming summer with us. Join us at College Park for 3 weeks. Your feedback and comments are also most welcome. Email Professor Kaufman for more information. We very much welcome your messages. And thank you for watching.
I will discuss with you the basic components of the old city. What comprises the main characteristics of the old city? First of all, you have the symbolic value of the city. Religious, cultural, historical, social, national, and political. If you look at Jerusalem today, it basically crystallizes all the things that I have just mentioned, where it becomes really very important for Muslim, Christians, and Jews alike to have certain high stakes in Jerusalem. Now, you have the component of border. The component of border, we're talking about 1 square kilometers. That's the entire old city. And sometimes we refer to it as the walled city, because there is a wall with 7 gates that is accessible from outside into the old city. So we're talking about 1 square kilometer, which is creating so much headache, I mean, for Palestinians and Israelis, even to discuss the issue or to put it on the table and try to come up with solutions over this issue.
Just to be giving you the headings of how can you expand your imagination, here are a few ideas. The first one is when you have a big problem, cut it into small pieces. That is what we call disaggregate. And when you look into the question of Jerusalem, you really have to look into the fact that the resolution for the whole city of Jerusalem divides into 2, Palestinians and Israelis. So it doesn't have to be the same as the resolution of the whole city of Jerusalem that divides into 3, Christian, Muslim, Jewish. And if you want to go about the population living there, the 35,000 people or so living there, or 40,000 people living there, you have 4 quarters, right? So you can divide into 4. So it doesn't have to be the same solution. And if you want to go into the little corner of the whole city, it only divides Muslims and Jews. The Christians have nothing to do with Haram al-Sharif, the Temple Mount. So it stands to reason when people say, oh, Jerusalem, how can we deal with it? Cut it into smaller pieces. Once we cut it into smaller pieces, there are 3 concentric areas, as you see it. Think about solutions that are different for the bigger Jerusalem. What Clinton says, what is Arab is going to be the capital of Palestine, what is Jewish is going to be the capital of Israel. And the question is, how do you handle areas that are a little bit out of place, some Jewish areas in Jerusalem, and so on and so forth. The first thing you have to think also about the whole city. Can you disaggregate the whole city? Think about it. The second very well-known solution is called what we call expand the cake before you cut it. In the bigger city of Jerusalem, of course, we have expanded it immensely. It's like 100 square miles. But you cannot expand the whole city of Jerusalem because there is a wall around. Maybe you people would not like to be because of the nature of the city. There are not going to be high-rise in the whole city of Jerusalem. Very unlikely. How can you expand it? Maybe down there, but then there are ruins. You cannot go because of archaeology. Big problem. But perhaps you can compensate if you expand the area of the big Jerusalem. Maybe people can feel more comfortable to share the small city, the whole city of Jerusalem. What we call then expand the cake before you cut it. There's something else that we call lateral thinking. That's another way of dealing. I don't have a moment to talk about it, but Edward de Bono is the one who has taught us how to think laterally. A wonderful idea. Think laterally, think about other cities that are divided. There are many cities that are divided. Some have solved it, some they didn't solve it. Many of the divided cities have an old city, like for instance Nicosia in Cyprus. Think about the old cities. Of course, between now and Thursday, obviously, they asking you for the impossible. But if you would really take an independent studies with me, or if you would go on the summer program that we have on Israel and Egypt and Palestine, we stay 10 days in Jerusalem. You can definitely take this issue of the old city and think about lateral thinking. What do we learn from other cities? Normally when we are stuck, we don't even look around, so we have to look around. That's lateral thinking. Another area of thinking about out of the box is what we call backcasting. Very few people are familiar with this technique, but it basically tells you if you cannot solve a situation now, think a little bit about the future, what we call the vision statement. Think 30 years ahead. Technology is going to change, population is going to change, the world is going to change. How is it going to affect the future of the whole city of Jerusalem? What would you like to see in your vision, Christian, Muslims, and Jews, that could be good for all of you 30 years ahead? Believe me, people will find it easier to agree 30 years in the future than what to do tomorrow. That's the nature of the beast, of the human being, that we get very much into a fight if we have to implement it now. But we can be very generous towards the other if we think about the future. So we can think about the future of the old city, and people will be surprised how much we tend to agree. Okay, if we agree on 10 points about the future of Jerusalem, can we backcast these 10 points from 30 years to 20 years? And then we have maybe from the 10 points, 8 points that are doable in 20 years. And then we say, okay, 10 years ahead, what could be the future of, and then we're getting very close to reality. 10 years is like a reality. So that is called backcasting, a fantastic technique that for us, dealing with conflict resolution, we often use it before we go into what do we do tomorrow. And just a couple of more and then we stop. That one is called alternative compensation. People think that you have to be paid in the same currency. Not necessarily. Think about, remember we spoke about Israel withdrawing from Sinai, making peace with Egypt. Remember I told you about the 2 checks of Jimmy Carter when they were having some difficulty in trying to agree on territory. Territory seems to be zero sum. You know, if Israel will give everything, will remain with nothing and so on. Not necessarily everything is territory, because these are countries that need money for development. Israel, absorption of immigrants, Egypt, a poor country with overpopulation. So here was Jimmy Carter with 2 checks. Well, the whole city of Jerusalem needs a lot of help, as my friend was saying. Let's see who can come up with alternatives. Could be money, it could be education, it could be anything you can imagine that is services is compensation in other means rather than territory. And even if we talk about territory, remember what we spoke about the Haram al-Sharif, the holy place there. We say you can have a 2-story sovereignty, because the Jews are interested on the bottom part of the Temple Mount, and the Muslims have 2 mosques on top. Although people say sovereignty is a straight line, horizontal line, when you look at it vertically, well, that's different. We are sovereign on the space, and that's ours. We are sovereign on the underground, the water is ours. So why not to speak, as Clinton is saying in the parameters, about the 2-story solution for the Haram al-Sharif. This is creativity at its best. It's changing from lateral to vertical the question of sovereignty. So this has to do with compensation. In this case, horizontal compensation with vertical compensation. Lots of ideas about it. And one last, and then it will be, maybe one last, yes, because of time. We call it log rolling. Log rolling. Log rolling is basically telling you, well, look, guys, you're not going to get all what you want to get. So we'll have to give you priorities. You may have many priorities in the whole city, and you have to set up your priorities. Suppose we give you from 0 to 100 score points for you to decide what is your priorities. We have, as my friends say, religious components, property components, historic components, cultural components, social, and you name it. And we can put and we ask the Israelis and Palestinians to put from a 1 to 100 because they have to prioritize what is more important and less important. And then when we start checking, you will be surprised that we can accommodate more than 50% on each side. I really could calculate it for you, and you will see surprisingly that is the case. In any event, the question of log rolling when it comes to Jerusalem can be, suppose they have the same interest, they say religiosity 50-50. Each one is say 50 of my 100 points are religiosity. Would be the case. Then we have the, as you play cards, there must be a winner and there must be a loser when you play, but how do you minimize it? One is taking the cards and that's doing the mixing, the shifting of the cards. And then the other one will be the first to choose the card. So you can really do the first time, I mix and you choose, the second time, and so on and so forth. That is, if you want, cutting your losses in the worst case, but in the best case, you can get more than the 50-50. That's called log rolling.
So what we did was we kind of divvied up the portions of governance among the three of us. I focused on like the actual governing the old city itself, and she focused on the conflict resolution in case we need to negotiate between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And then we focused on the urban planning, physical side of it. So in terms of governance, we thought of the idea of having an international independent party that would come in as an interim government that would begin the process of governing the old city where it's not partial, because obviously there's still tension between the Israelis and the Palestinians, not just in terms of their ethnicity, but in terms of religious affiliations. So we wanted to start with that, and under that we would have special systems where parties from both sides, and even the Armenians as well as the Christians, but as you mentioned, the Christians they'll come under Muslims. So we wanted to have where people from each quarters could come and represent and kind of share ideas to talk about what they would need in terms of governance and what would work for them and what won't work for them. So that was what we kind of thought of. And when we actually thought of the idea of maybe having the Israelis control or the Palestinians control, there is a disparity between the population within the old city. So we felt like having an international government or a third party that was impartial was the best idea to get the governance flowing.
And regarding the physical side, basically there have been in history divided and unified cities around the world. There's plethora of available, studies and whatnot. So the idea would be to perhaps bring in teams of individuals that are familiar with how to not only, so we've got the 4 quadrants, not only deal with, the current issues, the overburden of the infrastructure, like there's overcrowding, 35,000, that's significant, even from an urban planning standpoint, that's a lot of people. And you look at Tokyo with high-rises, 35,000 in 1 kilometer, it's nothing, but in this particular instance where there's limits to the height of the building, anyway, so there's current issues that need to be addressed. But then going forward, there's one architect, Palestinian architect, she's a director of what's called the Old City of Jerusalem Revitalization Program. And what it is...
Shadia Tukan?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I can over. Yeah, so she basically is into using architectural techniques such as adaptive reuse, restoration, and conservation. And what revitalization can bring, this is kind of where it ties into the civilian infrastructure, is it creates jobs, it gives skills, it's kind of education, but it gives skills to the youth to carry on, the skills of the masters. And then also, the main thing would be updating the infrastructure.